Hey, what's up, everyone? I got Kyle here with 302 and hopefully some interesting topics to talk about.
Yeah,
We'll see
definitely.
how it goes. Kyle, you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Kyle Morrand. I'm the CEO and technologist at 302 Interactive. 302 is a digital experience solutions provider. Here in Orlando, Florida, we do a lot of virtual reality and augmented reality product development and services for different companies.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I know at least for me, I always just tell people that it's like rapid prototyping because that's just what makes sense to me in my
Yeah.
head.
And that's where we
But
started, right? Like that's my kind of personal background. I love to just prototype things.
yeah, a lot of systems architecture and solution stuff. I
Absolutely.
know every time we have a conversation, you're very system oriented, like where the rules need to be there to where when I walk away,
Yeah,
everything still makes sense to whoever picks it up,
absolutely.
And that's obviously a little bit different than my world where the rules exist and I'm kind of trying to manipulate them in favor
Right.
of whoever it is I'm talking to. It's
Yeah.
like, how can we make sure that what we want to do is possible?
Right.
So it's definitely a cool kind of dynamic there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
How did you even get started in all this?
It's a good question. I went to college here at UCF, University of Central Florida. I was in originally the computer engineering program. Got really bored of that because it was very dry, and I'm a more creative person. So I switched to game design, and I would say from the people that I met in the game design program, more than anything, the professors that I met and some of their friends, I started doing what I'll say is like side hustle work, like here and there,
Mhm.
little tiny contracts, 15 an hour, working on some AR thing, especially in like 2014 when like Oculus DK1, DK2 were first coming out. Just a lot of tinkering for people. And that's, I think what people started, like you said, started to get to know me as is like this rapid prototyping person, just tinkering and doing things. And that started to pick up traction. And I had started a game studio called 302 Studios and was using the LLC for 302 Studios, which was intended to make games for my contracting work. And I think it was 2017 that I was working like a full time job and doing the contract work on the side. That I looked back and I had made the same amount of money doing contract work as I did with my full time job. And I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. Um, so we ended up switching the brand and the focus from game design, game development to contract work. And
Mhm.
that switch kind of helped us to really pick up the ball. People just started
Yeah.
calling us and was like, hey, you guys do this stuff? Like, we're looking for this work. Can you help us out? And that kind of started our journey towards like actually hiring employees and building that team up.
No, it's super cool. Because I know at least here in Orlando, like we have a lot of different schools for game design and
Right.
spatial computing, whatever you want to call it. And I always get asked, like, how do I get a job? Whatever else. And it seems like you kind of found your own way and made your own path.
Right.
And that's super interesting to me because I mean, this is definitely very similar for me in the sense of I've been working in the video game industry now for feels like 10 years at least. And, it's just kind of like definitely had to go a very roundabout creative way to get there in a sense, because I
Right.
started out on the content side, then I was doing the Twitch partner thing and then doing some, kind of biz dev consulting work and all that and just ended up on the legal end, which is a perfect home for me,
Right.
and it's definitely unique. But what would you say was the biggest thing that you did right as a student to kind of get those opportunities you got?
That's a good question. I would say two things that we did when I was in school. One, I made really good friends with my professors, Peter Smith and Gideon Shabib over at UCF, for both really awesome professors, not just as professors to teach, but as just people. They were great resources. They were great friends of mine now, and they helped connect me with their friends. Right, like
Mhm.
they were really passionate about getting any of the students that were interested out into the real world, connecting them with people over in Research Park, with people in downtown Orlando. That's how I got involved. I think from Peter Smith, I met Kunal and got involved in Nenomicon.
Mhm.
which is the indie community here in Orlando. And I think my first couple of contracts were from friends of Peter Smith's. So really networking, I would just say like the big, scary, like just go and network with people.
Mhm.
They were really helpful. And then I think the other side, with the people that I met on the student side, I was really focused on gathering friends and around a common goal. So we actually in school, we decided that we were just going to start this game studio. It's called the 302 Studios. I printed a bunch of t-shirts. We all wore our t-shirts every class, like presentation, and like nobody else did that, right? Like everybody else was doing their own thing in school, and we were the weird guys that started a business and had like a uniform, right? But people remembered, and I think it was important, even though we kind of stood out and it was a little awkward and weird. It allowed for people to remember us and have that conversation early.
No, that's awesome. And I mean, it's definitely a super interesting way to do it, because just looking back, I don't think I ever saw student projects or anything wearing matching t-shirts, you know, even back in school with some of the stuff I was doing. And I mean, again, more of my stuff probably was more on the like economics business end. So I don't think anyone would have really been like, yeah, let's match, you know, but like it makes sense for like trying to get people behind a common goal of like building a game. What was the first like game project you worked on that you thought had some commercial potential?
Oh, that's a good question. We worked on a game in our summer workshop called Spitfire. It was a dragon. You were a dragon and you were flying around in a multiplayer like combat scenario, and it was a lot of fun. We actually took that to a few conferences like Orlando IX and what's the other one? Otronicon. Got to show that off, and that helped us start showcasing at events, having business conversations like, oh, you guys can build this. This is really cool. Like, what else can you build? So showing that stuff off at conferences was great.
So I think you mentioned it earlier, but you kind of had people kind of starting to realize that you could do these kind of rapid prototypes, kind of similar to like a game jam, where you're building those games in, you know, a weekend or something. People starting to be like, wait, you can do that in other fields. What were some of the projects you were working on there?
I would say some of them that started off was really marketing. There's a few marketing companies in Orlando that were interested in like, hey, this VR, AR game stuff. How can I do that for marketing, right? Like, especially in the couple early years of this new VR, AR wave, people were really interested in like, how does this apply to my industry? Marketing was one of those where we started building small apps and just started showcasing. Really, I had one demo that I did for somebody. It was just like their logo in AR, and they were like, and I was like, this is not amazing, but they loved it, right? And it was something new and fresh. And then I think from there, I worked on a project, Electrify with Brand XR. That started off as just a small contract project, and it just ended up getting a lot of traction and growing for them as a product, which is awesome. So a lot of marketing side, but also on the, especially here in Orlando, there's like simulation work that I got myself into. A lot of phase one projects in simulation are focused on more prototyping and research development, and those could be like 1-2 man projects. So I ended up getting on a couple of those with guys, Stu Armstrong, who I consider like a mentor for what I know for augmented reality. But he and I worked on a research paper together. Ended up doing a talk in Canada about that research paper, which was pretty cool. So a lot of like small jobs, and each of these projects like maybe like 8 weeks long at the most. But you know, they got us a lot of traction, I think.
So what did you do to kind of combine those small projects to build it into an actual business? I
think doing everything under the brand 302. It was really just like everything that I did as 302. I never did contract work as Kyle Morrand, independent contractor or anything like that. I always did it as like the business. And even larger things where I had one company that really wanted to hire me. They're like, oh, we want to hire you to do this stuff. And I was like, can I just do it as under my business instead? They're like, well, we give you benefits and all that stuff. And I was like, I'd rather just do it under my business. And I had no benefits. I had no anything, but I just I wanted to build that traction into the brand itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over time, I would say like the first 3-4 years that meant nothing, but that 5th year it meant everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think being diligent about that was helpful.
What do you think was the big kind of inflection point for you in that 5th year? Like what really changed things?
We got one really big project that consumed my time full time, and I had to then hire somebody else to help
Yeah.
the contract work, and that snowballed because then there was 2 people to feed.
So basically you promoted yourself out of a job to the point that you had to grow to that next level, and then you had to find a new you. Yeah.
Exactly. And I for me, I'm very team oriented. I like
Mm-hmm.
having a strong team. So I didn't want to just like contract it out to somebody and then when I was done, that was it. I worked with them to say like, hey, we're gonna build a team. If we're gonna do this, you're gonna be on my team and we're gonna figure this out. And now I have 2 mouths to feed and then 3 mouths to feed. And, so for me mentally, I treated it like that rather than just like these one-off people that could come
Mm-hmm.
and go. It was a group decision, and that group just keeps getting bigger now.
No, that's awesome. So what year are you in right now, and how big have you gotten to? Like,
I think we just had our 6th anniversary in June, and we're at 8 employees and a couple contractors.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what is it about like AR that really kind of gets you interested in it?
Ooh, AR. We have a friend,
Mm-hmm.
John Pinnick, who's very interested in VR. I'll use that as a comparison. VR to me is very immersive. It's awesome. It's full-fledged. You get all the content. You get to dive into the game world. And I think that's great. But I think the advantages of like AR and mixed reality are you're maintaining the real world around you and you're adding value to the real world, which is a very interesting and complex problem. But if we can do it properly, it allows us to interact with our real world in a very unique way. And my hope is that it, especially for us who are these digital natives that are always on our phones and always looking down at our phone and on the computer, I hope that spatial computing can move towards allowing us to participate in the world and with each other in an engaging way while not losing the value that our smartphones add to us.
Yeah, it's definitely a really interesting point that could almost be its own episode just on how communications changed, especially right now with COVID and the fact that, everyone's really kind of needed to adapt. Obviously, for people who aren't super familiar with AR, Pokemon Go is a really low-hanging example of it being implemented. I think that was super popular, 3-4 years ago. Obviously, it's still around, but it became like that craze back then.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great example of like, to me, the AR in that game is okay, right? Like it looks okay. It's on your phone. It's fine. It's good enough, but it gathered 100 people into a corner, and then to each other, and then they gathered around a tree, like 500 yards away, and then they talked to each other. Like that social aspect is so valuable, I think.
No, it was super cool for me because it was just like I was talking to people who I probably haven't talked to in forever because it's like, okay, where are these certain ones going to appear, and
right.
I remember having like Discord threads for a little while, just trying to kind of track like rare sightings of things. And it was super unique having something like that become almost like a moment in almost history in a lot of ways.
100%.
Super crazy. But going back to just how communication and stuff, has needed to change a little bit with the fact that we're now doing a lot of this stuff on Zoom or, other platforms. We're using StreamYard right now to talk to people on LinkedIn, which is kind of crazy in a lot of ways to me. How have you guys adapted to all that right now?
It's a good question. I would say for my team, I'll speak for my team first before myself. My team had to shift because we're in the Orlando game space. We have our office there. And while they enjoy remote work, they also enjoy being together. They enjoy collaborating, especially the work that we do is very collaborative and creative. So really just jumping into like Google Meets, like Zoom calls. We've been trying to like keep that up to date. We have check-ins at the beginning and the end of the day on Slack, and we're constantly trying to keep communication rolling on Slack all day. So that's been a bit of I think a creative barrier, but from a general communication standpoint, I started 302 mentally remotely. And then when it started to pick up, I ended up with a job in a warehouse. So like the whole time it was remote for me. And then after that, I flew to Japan for 6 months, and so I was remote. So
yeah,
it hasn't changed for me too much, honestly, but I know for the rest of my team, it's created some good scenarios of being able to relax and be at home and be with family and all of that. But then at the same time, those creative challenges are still a lot of friction there that we're trying to work out.
What are some of the bigger struggles to not being in the same room right now?
I'd say one is solving problems. It's a lot harder to pick up the phone or to send a Google Meet to somebody and say like, hey, I have a problem. Can you jump on a call with me? Rather than like turning to the next guy next to you and like, hey, I have a problem. Can you help me? There's just this like dwell time of like when it would take 30 seconds to turn to somebody, now it mentally turns into like an extra half hour of like, oh, I'll just try to figure it out so I don't have to bother somebody. So there's that, I think that barrier, and it's something, I don't remember who I was talking to, but somebody mentioned like just setting up like audio channels that you can just jump into a room and be like, hey, is anybody here that can help me? Might be a good way to solve that. But I think
Facebook and Discord both kind of have that conceptually. I've just never tried to use it.
Right.
It's an interesting concept because, just kind of even just thinking back, I'm in the same co-working space you are. So within the Orlando game space, I mean, there's moments where I know I'll just be like, all right, I got to take a mental break real quick, tap out, walk over, and I'll just be like, okay, I'm going to go talk to Kyle, or I'm going to go talk to Troy, or I'm going to go talk to Sean.
Right.
It's definitely weird not having that right now. Because it's just like you've got a lot more opportunities for, I'd say, less proactive distraction, because I can just be like, all right, well, I need to take a break for a little bit. Let's pop the TV on, or let's, go for a walk, which is not a bad thing necessarily. But, when it doesn't necessarily need to happen every time I do it, so you definitely find ways to keep yourself busy when you're at home.
And I think like the unplanned things, right? Like you can plan all day and say like, I'm going to do all these different communications and talk to these people and everything. But when you're physically somewhere where random things can happen, random is such a valuable piece of communication that is hard to measure, right? But I'll give you an example. Bobby and I, we were in the conference room at the Game Space a couple weeks ago, and John Cunningham just happened to like pop in, and he was trying to use the room, and he was like, oh, you guys are in the room. And then he just like, oh, by the way, I had this thought. And then it turned into a half-hour conversation. Like we would have never had that conversation if we weren't in that space. So there's no way to have that randomness digitally.
No, I get asked that all the time. Like, why do I go to an office typically? I mean, I haven't since March really, other than to go pick up mail and checks and other random things. Occasionally have a small meeting, but for me, it's really what you're talking about. It's just so much easier to have those kind of opportunistic moments and kind of have those quick, spontaneous kind of like, oh, hey, you might be exactly who I need to solve this issue kind of thing. Right. It's like once you start going back to, working from home and stuff like that, it's a little bit of out of sight, out of mind. You sometimes forget unless you're kind of cultivating that community, even through those offline kind of moments, and online kind of moments. Right. I know that's definitely something we've been trying to do, even just within the Orlando game space right now, is trying to figure out what can we do to kind of create community there, and it's a difficult time right now to be trying to do something with a co-working space. Right. Like COVID is definitely not exactly the best thing that ever happened for that kind of office type of space. Right. And that's what's always been kind of impressive to me is that pretty much everybody there has been like, well, we love what this is. We want to see it keep going, Right. And for anybody who's not as familiar with that, do you want to tell people about the Orlando game space? I know you were there in version, I don't know, what was it? I guess we're in 2.0 now, right?
Yeah, I was like the beginning.
You're like the beginning of 2.0.
Yeah. What I was going to say for you, I think you've been really helpful on just keeping everybody engaged, setting up meetings, setting up different conversations around even different initiatives. Like you've called me just like, hey, we should talk about this and gather 3 people to talk about it. So I think that's super helpful and awesome. I think the game space as a whole, I think it was really intended to be initially a co-working space, right? Like you said, it's just a space for people to work. It's the game space, place for people to make games. But it evolved in a great organic way of being more focused on the community, being focused on the people in Orlando that are trying to do games and related to games like yourself, and use game technologies and bring all those folks together in a community, in a Discord, in a phone call, to share knowledge, to share resources, and to be able to help leverage each other as we're trying to grow forward, which has been I think I've been in the game tech community for the past 5-6 years, and Keith Lackey from Steamroller Studios, he has this phrase that he says, like, the tide rises all ships. That's been one of my favorite things about the Orlando community as a whole. I grew up in Miami, where it's a little more, I would say, competitive. Whereas I feel Orlando's very collaborative. It's very like, let's build together.
I know this is going to sound weird, but that is almost one of the advantages we have with the fact that it isn't like a zero-sum incentive pool. Right. Just because I've heard from other cities that have sometimes a little bit of extra money flowing in, when it comes to incentives and stuff. People don't really want to work with you if they see you as the guy taking the other hand out. You know what I mean? Right. So it's like, okay, if you take money, then there's less for me. We're kind of lucky in the fact that Orlando as a whole has always kind of been more of a collaborative kind of community. And I mean, I don't know if that'll change over time or if we'll see, different fractionalization or something, but it's always been interesting to me.
Yeah, definitely.
No, but even kind of jumping back into some of that stuff, what would you say would be your piece of advice for somebody trying to start up their own business right now? Like what are some of the mistakes that you think you made early on that you could have done better?
Not knowing you, no. I think for me, I got myself I wouldn't say in over my head, but in a variety of situations. So I'll step back, I guess. I work on games and game technologies, but what I say is I work on games for everything else. I've done projects with healthcare, simulation, education, marketing. We've done projects with tourism, with attractions. We've done all these different projects with different industries, and big and small, and products and large corporations. And I've had all these conversations where I don't know half the words that they're talking about sometimes. And then they put a contract in front of me, especially when I was younger. They put a contract in front of me and say, hey, we're going to pay you to do a thing. I'm like, okay. So I'm sure there's paperwork lingering out there somewhere that maybe I shouldn't have signed that paperwork. Maybe I shouldn't have done the things that I did. I was lucky, knock on wood, to not have any issues with that. But it definitely, I would say, held me back to not initially have a good support network. I was doing all my own research, doing all my own kind of I do my own finances. We're doing our own bookkeeping, our accounting, like everything. I felt for some reason that I had to kind of do everything on my own when I started. I think it might just come from that indie game stigma of like, business is bad. Like, yeah. Bad and weird, and I still have that a little bit, but building a healthy support network early on would have been something that I wish I would have done.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, because I mean, at least in my perspective, when I've talked to a lot of indie devs, that kind of business side / almost soft skills side in a lot of ways with community and social and marketing often kind of gets pushed back on a little bit, where it's like, we'll deal with it eventually, like we got to make sure the game's good first. And I mean, hey, they're not wrong in a lot of ways. The game needs to be good. It needs to get built. You do need maybe that extra 20 grand for making sure you can get the art assets and the programming needs you have, but there's a point where sometimes some of that other stuff needs to take the forefront too. And I mean, just from my perspective, I was covering indie games since, I don't know, I think it was like Shadow Complex or Castle Crashers, whichever one was first. way back when like Braid was the indie darling game at the time, like that kind of stuff. So I've been talking to indie devs on the press side for forever, and I would always have people kind of be like passing me some contracts and just let me look at them, and I'm like, I'm a law student right now, right? I'm not giving you legal advice. That's not a thing.
Right.
But I mean, it was not a bad thing for me to be able to see those, because then I got to kind of see, what kind of stuff people were signing, and it's just like, for me, part of why I even got into this whole thing from the start was just because of the fact I like the ability to kind of help creative people do what they want to do and do the creative things they want to do without having that stress of like needing to know exactly what indemnification means,
Right.
And there's a lot of areas and contracts where people sneak some kind of shady stuff in there sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
I had to get a guy out of a contract last year, and I mean, it was not easy. It's one of those things where it's like, if you sign it, it's legal and valid. You're probably going to have to uphold it, and I mean, for us to settle it and get him out was not necessarily a cheap endeavor when you consider the price of having it reviewed at the start would have been, negligible for the most part with what he was getting paid out of it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely kind of one of those weird areas. I got lucky earlier this year where I got to kind of see something I reviewed actually turn out in a positive way with Sean. And I know he won't mind me mentioning this,
Mm-hmm.
but I was just reviewing a pretty boilerplate kind of NDA or something for him. And I just like tweaked one provision and it managed to actually hit in a way that actually benefited him. So it was just kind of nice to actually see it be like, oh, you just got a nice little payday because of that small tweak we made. That, it was one of those things where I think I maybe billed him like $100. It wasn't like it was anything complicated, and it just kind of hit, and he made 20x that or something, and it's nice to see.
Yeah, that's where like having folks like yourself and that support system it's like peace of mind more than anything, right? Like I can't say personally like there's been a particular like, oh, we made a bunch of money because John helped us with this thing, right?
Yeah.
But for me, it's really like I don't have to worry about it, right? Like I can act really quickly because I know you have my back, if that makes sense. And everybody else in our kind of support network, I can move so much faster now and make decisions quicker because I have that trust with my support system and with your.
No, and I think that's important, whether it's legal or accounting or marketing, finance, whatever areas you're dealing with, to have people who can kind of, take the reins, who know what they're doing and kind of help you out.
Right.
And I mean, the thing I always complain about when it comes to legal, and I'm normally complaining about this with accountants, is I just hate the fact that I'm selling you peace of mind, but it's also risk aversion in a lot of ways. It's like, okay, pay me $1,000 now, and you might not owe 60 down the road. Right. Whereas an accountant can just kind of walk in and be like, pay me 2 and I'll give you 4. And I'm like, that's not even remotely fair, man. Right. I don't know if it's like that with other industries, but I'm always jealous of that one. It's just such an easier sell. But yeah, no, I think building up that support network is huge. I mean, even just within kind of similar thinking people in the same kind of industries you're in, because I'm sure there's been some people you've worked with along the way that have kind of helped guide you to where you got.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I would say the most recent that I've been more conscious of and trying to leverage is Troy from Code Firm.
Mm-hmm.
I get in situations sometimes where people are like, oh, you do like AR, right? That means you know like everything about computer vision and how to like data analyze all of this stuff. I'm like, no, I know how to visualize things and make things look really good and create a good experience, but that technical back end, it's out of my wheelhouse, right? But having Troy now in that relation, we've been able to bounce back and forth with each other of saying like, oh, that experience, Kyle should do that, or oh, that back system you need, Troy should be doing that, and we can work together to not lose out on that conversation.
And that's another kind of perfect example of the fact that for people who want to work in the game industry, there's a lot of different routes.
Yeah.
Like I kind of went through the door through business and legal. Troy over there, he's got server load balancing, he's got AI, he's got some of the kind of crazy programming kind of issues that the average person doesn't want to deal with that have been solved in other industries.
Right.
You can kind of pull them and apply them to gaming for an indie dev, you know? And that's just always pretty cool to me to see how some of that stuff works, you know? I saw another attorney actually talking about this last week, but he was talking about it within the context of sports. And it's like, okay, so you want to be a sports attorney. It's like, well, that means you just need to be a really good IP attorney or a really good corporate law attorney. Or you need to be a really good something else, you know? You need to be good at something before you can be a sports attorney. You know, same kind of thing with trying to get into the video game industry. It's a lot of times it's like, well, what's your way in? You know, like what are you doing that you're good at besides being a video game, you know, worker? So that's definitely one of those things that a good piece of advice for people kind of starting off and trying to figure out their own way.
Yeah, 100%.
But awesome. I think that's most of what I got. Is there anything you'd like to kind of let people know or chat about what you're working on?
I think for me, what we've been working on a lot lately is kind of helping people with their products. I would say myself, I started off doing contract work for hire, just solving problems here and there. And we ended up falling into, and it's something you and I have chatted about a bit, falling into product development.
Mm-hmm.
Just meeting people and startups that are like, hey, we're trying to build this crazy thing. Can you help us? And for me particularly, I don't like to just like make code and hand it off and be like, here you go. I take pride in the work that I do. I like to work with people that are trying to create something that's either helpful or educational. For example, we're working on a project with a professor over in Tampa that's trying to help educate kids using augmented reality. Awesome, sweet. How can I help you? Right, and not just how can I help you with the code, but how can I help you like make connections, talk to people. The whole business digital strategy side of things. What are you trying to figure out? I want to be involved in that. So that's something that I think is a next step for our business. We're kind of evolving towards like being partners in product development, but that's also a sticky navigational situation.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of fun stuff for us to navigate there when you start moving away from kind of more the traditional independent contractor work for hire.
Right.
Like, I give this to you, it's yours. I no longer have any kind of real liability or need to keep going, you know, toward more of a partnership kind of model. And I think you guys are doing it in a really unique way where you've kind of got multiple different ways of things working, you know, like you have games that you're working on, you have AR products that you're developing, you have some, you know, just straight up consulting work that you're doing. Right. And it kind of allows you to have those multiple different revenue streams that, you know, if any one got hit, it's not like you're going to disappear tomorrow kind of thing. And that's definitely something you guys have done really well. That's really smart in my opinion.
Yeah.
You guys do have a game you are working on though right now, right?
Yes. Yeah, we are. We have actually a couple of games. One game that we're working on is an updated version of a game we made in 2018 called The Commission. This is The Commission 1920. It's a PC strategy map game is a good way to put it. You run a mafia organization and you're trying to paint the map and take control of the city of New Shore. So that's been fun. That'll be coming out probably early next year. We're pretty excited about that. And then another game we're working on with another partner of ours is a mobile card game that I can't talk too much about, but that'll come out in like a couple months actually.
No, and I know you guys are also holding some meetings about like maybe some other projects down the road. And I know I'm super curious to see where those end up, because I think you told me 3 or 4 of them, and I'm like, I'm still really pulling for one of them because I'm like, that is just such a fun kind of concept.
Yeah, that one we'll see if it happens.
That's awesome. But thank you again so much for joining. I really do appreciate it. I'm going to be trying to do these every week, 3 p.m. on Thursday. Should have some good talks for you guys. Thanks again, Kyle. I really appreciate your time, and later.